Picture this. You're walking through a medieval palace, and suddenly you hear the soft clinking of metal chains. But these aren't shackles or prison bonds. These are the glittering gold chains draped around the neck of the most powerful woman in 14th century Europe, a queen whose jewelry collection was so legendary that foreign ambassadors would travel hundreds of miles just to witness her magnificent chains sparkling in the candlelight. This isn't some fairy tale. This is the real story of Queen Elizabeth of Poland, who ruled medieval Hungary when wearing chains as jewelry wasn't just fashionable, it was a declaration of power that could start wars or seal peace treaties. And here's the wild part. Archaeologists just discovered what might be her actual jewelry buried in the ruins of her palace. We're talking about 700-year-old treasure that's rewriting everything we thought we knew about medieval fashion and royal power. But before we dive into this incredible discovery, let me paint you a picture of what life was really like for a medieval queen who turned chains into the ultimate status symbol. Because what happened in 14th century, Hungary wasn't just about pretty jewelry. It was about survival, politics, and a woman who understood that sometimes the heaviest chains are the ones that set you free. Medieval Hungary wasn't the quiet backwater you might imagine. This was one of the richest kingdoms in Europe, sitting on gold mines so productive they made the Hungarian royal court wealthier than most entire countries. Gold flowed through this kingdom like water, and the Hungarian goldsmiths became legendary across Europe for their incredible craftsmanship. They weren't just making jewelry, they were creating portable treasuries that queens could wear around their necks. Now, when I say Queen Elizabeth wore chains, I'm not talking about some delicate little necklace you'd find at a modern jewelry store. These were massive, elaborate gold chains that could weigh several pounds and cost more than most people would see in their entire lifetime. Imagine chains so heavy that wearing them was actually a physical workout, so ornate that each link was a masterpiece of medieval art, and so valuable that a single chain could buy you an entire castle. The craftsmanship behind these chains was absolutely mind-blowing. Medieval Hungarian goldsmiths would spend months creating a single chain, hand-forging each individual link with techniques that modern jewelers still struggle to replicate. They used a process called fire gilding, where they'd apply thin layers of gold to silver using mercury and extreme heat. The result was jewelry that gleamed like the sun itself, creating an almost supernatural glow that made queens appear divinely blessed. But here's where it gets really interesting. These chains weren't just fashion statements, they were political weapons. When Queen Elizabeth walked into a room wearing her chains, every foreign diplomat, every rival noble, every potential ally immediately understood exactly how much power and wealth the Hungarian kingdom possessed. The weight of her jewelry literally represented the weight of her political influence. Each chain told a story. Some carried religious relics, tiny pieces of saints' bones or fragments of the true cross, that demonstrated the queen's piety and divine protection. Others featured heraldic symbols that proclaimed family alliances and territorial claims. A few contained hidden compartments where messages could be concealed for secret diplomatic communication. Elizabeth's chains were like wearing a medieval internet around her neck, broadcasting information to anyone who knew how to read the symbols. The religious significance of these chains was absolutely crucial in medieval society. People believed that certain gemstones and precious metals had actual magical properties. Sapphires were thought to protect against poison, incredibly important when royal assassination attempts were common. Rubies supposedly prevented illness and brought good fortune in battle. Emeralds were associated with fertility and protecting eyesight. Queen Elizabeth, who gave birth to 5 sons and lived to be 75 in an era when most people died by 40, probably credited some of her success to the protective power of her jewelry. Medieval people took this stuff seriously. Court physicians and astrologers would actually advise the queen on which chains to wear for different occasions based on the supposed mystical properties of various gems and metals. Going to sign a peace treaty? Better wear the sapphire chain for protection against treachery. Hosting a feast for foreign dignitaries? The emerald chain would demonstrate prosperity and divine favor. Attending a religious ceremony? The chain with embedded relics would show your devotion and potentially earn you some heavenly protection. But the real genius of Queen Elizabeth's chain collection was how it solved a uniquely medieval problem: portable wealth. In an era before banks, before secure vaults, before any kind of reliable financial institutions. How do you store and transport massive amounts of wealth? You wear it. Elizabeth's chains functioned as a mobile treasury that she could take anywhere, hide if necessary, or quickly convert to cash during emergencies. This wasn't just practical, it was brilliant political theatre. When Elizabeth travelled to other kingdoms for diplomatic missions, her chains announced Hungarian wealth and power before she even spoke a word. Foreign rulers would see her approaching, notice the incredible chains glittering around her neck, and immediately understand they were dealing with someone who represented serious money and serious political clout. The archaeological discovery that brought Elizabeth's story back into the spotlight happened at Visegrad, the stunning palace complex where she lived after her husband's death. Researchers from the King Matthias Museum were excavating the medieval palace ruins when they uncovered a pair of gilded silver clothing clasps that date to the first half of the 14th century. These tiny masterpieces, just 3-5 centimeters wide, feature intricate open-work decoration that demonstrates the incredible skill of medieval Hungarian goldsmiths. Now, you might be thinking, wait, these are clasps, not chains. But here's the thing about medieval jewelry. Everything was connected. These clasps would have been used to fasten the neckline of Elizabeth's dress, and chains would have been draped and attached to these very clasps. The discovery of these clasps in what archaeologists believe was Elizabeth's private residence suggests they might have been part of her personal jewelry collection. The craftsmanship of these newly discovered pieces is absolutely extraordinary. The openwork decoration required techniques that pushed medieval metalworking to its absolute limits. Goldsmiths had to pierce incredibly intricate patterns into metal less than a millimeter thick without breaking it. They had to create perfectly symmetrical designs without any of the precision tools we have today. They accomplished all of this using nothing but hand tools, keen eyesight, and skills passed down through generations of craftsmen. But what makes these clasps truly special is what they represent about Queen Elizabeth's daily life. These weren't ceremonial pieces worn only for grand state occasions. These were everyday jewelry items that the Queen would have worn while conducting regular court business, receiving visitors, or simply going about her daily routine in the palace. They give us a glimpse into the intimate details of how a medieval queen actually lived and dressed. The fact that these clasps were found in the palace courtyard is particularly fascinating. Did Elizabeth lose them during a walk through the gardens? Were they dropped during some dramatic court intrigue? Or were they perhaps hidden during a time of danger and never recovered? The archaeological context suggests they were lost or abandoned sometime in the 14th century and then buried under centuries of dirt and debris until modern excavators uncovered them. What's really amazing is that these tiny pieces survived at all. Medieval jewelry was incredibly valuable, and most pieces were eventually melted down and recycled when families needed cash or when fashion styles changed. The fact that these clasps remained buried and intact for 700 years makes them incredibly rare survivors from Elizabeth's world. The technical analysis of these pieces reveals fascinating details about medieval Hungarian goldsmithing techniques. The silver base was carefully shaped and pierced, then covered with a thin layer of gold using fire gilding processes that required extreme skill to execute without ruining the delicate metalwork. The decorative patterns show influences from both Byzantine and Western European artistic traditions, reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of Elizabeth's court. This blending of artistic styles wasn't accidental. Medieval Hungary sat at the crossroads of Europe, with trade routes connecting east and west, north and south. Elizabeth's court attracted artists, craftsmen, and diplomats from across the known world. Her jewelry collection would have reflected this international character, incorporating techniques and styles from Constantinople, Paris, Venice, and beyond. The chains that would have complemented these clasps represented the absolute pinnacle of medieval luxury manufacturing. Each link had to be individually forged, shaped, and joined to its neighbors with precision that modern machine manufacturing can barely match. The weight distribution had to be perfect, so the chains would drape elegantly without causing discomfort. The proportions had to be calculated so that the chains would enhance the wearer's appearance rather than overwhelming it. Medieval goldsmiths guarded their techniques jealously, passing secrets down through family lines and guild apprenticeships that could last for decades. A master goldsmith capable of creating chains worthy of a queen represented years of training, incredible natural talent, and access to the finest materials and tools available in the medieval world. The gold used in Elizabeth's chains came from Hungarian mines that were among the most productive in medieval Europe. Hungarian gold was so pure and plentiful that it became the standard for international trade. Merchants across Europe specifically sought Hungarian gold because of its quality and consistency. This gave Elizabeth's chains not just aesthetic value but also monetary credibility that enhanced their political impact. The process of actually creating these chains was like watching medieval magic in action. Picture a goldsmith's workshop in 14th century Visegrad, filled with the glow of forge fires and the rhythmic hammering of metal on anvil. The master craftsman would start with raw Hungarian gold, heating it until it glowed like a tiny sun, then drawing it through progressively smaller holes in iron plates to create wire thin enough for chain links, yet strong enough to support the weight of heavy pendants. But here's where it gets really wild. These weren't just simple loops of gold wire. Each link was a miniature sculpture, often featuring decorative elements that required separate casting and attachment. Some chains incorporated links shaped like heraldic symbols, religious motifs, or even tiny portraits. The most elaborate chains might take a team of goldsmiths an entire year to complete, working with techniques so complex that many of them died with their creators. The finishing process alone was an art form that would make modern jewelers weep. After all the links were joined, the entire chain had to be polished to a mirror finish, using techniques that involved hours of hand-rubbing with special abrasives. Then came the gilding process, where additional layers of gold were applied to ensure the chain would maintain its brilliant color even after years of wear. The final step involved blessing the chain by court chaplains, because medieval people believed that jewelry without divine protection was just asking for trouble. Queen Elizabeth's chains weren't just worn around her neck either. Medieval fashion allowed for incredibly creative chain arrangements that modern people would find completely bizarre. Chains could be draped across the chest in complex patterns, wound around the arms like golden serpents, or even incorporated into elaborate headdresses that turned the queen's head into a walking treasure display. Some of the heaviest ceremonial chains required special supports built into the queen's clothing just to distribute the weight properly. The variety in Elizabeth's chain collection was absolutely staggering. Court inventories from similar medieval royal collections described dozens of different chains for different occasions and seasons. There were lightweight summer chains made from delicate gold wire, heavy winter chains incorporating fur and fabric elements, ceremonial chains so elaborate they required servants to help put them on, and travel chains designed to be easily hidden or quickly converted to currency if the queen found herself in danger. Each chain also served as a kind of medieval social media, broadcasting information about the Queen's current political alliances, religious devotions, and family connections. Diplomatic observers stationed at Elizabeth's court would send detailed reports back to their home kingdoms describing exactly which chains the Queen wore to different events, because these choices contained coded messages about Hungarian foreign policy intentions. For instance, when Elizabeth wore chains incorporating Polish heraldic symbols, it signaled her continued connection to her birth family and might indicate upcoming diplomatic initiatives with Poland. When she appeared in chains featuring religious relics associated with specific saints, it could suggest the kingdom's position on various theological debates that had political implications. When she wore chains gifted by foreign rulers, it demonstrated the strength of those international relationships. The maintenance of these chains required an entire department of court specialists. Gold chains, despite their value, were surprisingly fragile. The constant movement of wearing them caused stress points where links could weaken or break. The Queen employed master goldsmiths whose full-time job was keeping her chain collection in perfect condition, repairing damage, cleaning away tarnish, and even redesigning chains to incorporate new political or religious elements as circumstances changed. The storage and security of Elizabeth's chains presented logistical challenges that would impress modern museum curators. The Queen's private chambers included specially designed strongrooms with multiple locks, hidden compartments, and even false walls where the most valuable chains could be concealed during times of political uncertainty. Court records describe elaborate protocols for moving chains between storage locations, with armed guards and decoy containers used to prevent theft. But the real sophistication of Elizabeth's chain system became apparent during diplomatic negotiations. Medieval diplomacy was largely about displays of wealth and power, and the Queen's chains served as both carrot and stick in international relations. When foreign ambassadors visited her court, Elizabeth would carefully choose which chains to wear based on the message she wanted to send. Wearing modest chains suggested humility and openness to negotiation. Wearing her most elaborate chains demonstrated that Hungary had the resources to wage war if diplomacy failed. The psychological impact of these chain displays was carefully calculated. Medieval people believed that visible wealth indicated divine favor, so a queen who could afford incredible chains must have God's blessing on her political decisions. This belief gave Elizabeth's jewelry collection genuine political power that extended far beyond its monetary value. Foreign rulers would hesitate to oppose someone who so obviously enjoyed heavenly protection. The chains also served as a form of medieval insurance policy. During the frequent political crises that plagued 14th century Europe, royal families often had to flee their kingdoms with minimal notice. Elizabeth's portable chain treasury meant she could escape with enough wealth to maintain her lifestyle in exile, hire mercenary armies to reclaim her throne, or establish herself as a power player in whatever kingdom offered her sanctuary. The technical innovations developed for Elizabeth's chains eventually spread throughout European royal courts and influenced jewelry design for centuries. Hungarian goldsmiths pioneered new alloy combinations that made chains stronger while maintaining their lustrous appearance. They developed joint mechanisms that allowed chains to move more naturally with the wearer's body. They created new decorative techniques that maximized the visual impact of precious stones and metals. These innovations weren't just aesthetic improvements. They solved real practical problems that medieval queens faced when wearing heavy jewelry during long court ceremonies. A poorly designed chain could cause neck pain, restrict movement, or even create dangerous situations if it caught on furniture or clothing during formal events. The engineering advances developed for Elizabeth's chains made royal jewelry both more beautiful and more functional. The international influence of Hungarian chain-making techniques became a source of national pride and economic advantage. Foreign courts would specifically request Hungarian goldsmiths to create chains in the distinctive style that had made Elizabeth's collection so famous. This demand created a luxury export industry that brought additional wealth into the Hungarian kingdom and spread Hungarian artistic influence throughout medieval Europe. The social implications of chain wearing extended far beyond the royal court as well. Wealthy merchants and nobles throughout Hungary began commissioning their own elaborate chains in imitation of the Queen's style. This created a cascade effect where chain jewelry became the definitive marker of high social status throughout the kingdom. Sumptuary laws had to be passed to prevent lower-class citizens from wearing chains that might be mistaken for noble rank. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Elizabeth's chain collection was how it reflected the changing role of women in medieval politics. Unlike earlier medieval queens who were expected to remain largely invisible, Elizabeth used her chains to command attention and project authority in traditionally male-dominated spaces. Her jewelry became a form of armor that protected her political position while simultaneously advertising her power to potential allies and enemies. The chains allowed Elizabeth to participate in the medieval culture of competitive display that was normally reserved for male rulers. Knights competed through tournaments and military achievements, but Elizabeth competed through the magnificence of her jewelry collection. Foreign rulers who visited her court found themselves engaged in a kind of diplomatic arms race, where the splendor of royal regalia became a measure of national strength. This transformation of jewelry from passive decoration to active political tool represented a significant evolution in medieval royal culture. Elizabeth's chains weren't just accessories, they were instruments of statecraft that helped her maintain power, conduct diplomacy, and project Hungarian strength across medieval Europe. The recent archaeological discoveries at Visegrad are giving us our first tangible glimpse into this remarkable fusion of fashion, politics, and power that defined one of the most influential queens in medieval history. The economic ripple effects of Elizabeth's chain obsession created an entire medieval luxury ecosystem that nobody saw coming. Picture this: Hungarian gold mines that were already pumping out incredible wealth suddenly had to ramp up production because the Queen's jewelry demands were literally reshaping the entire kingdom's economy. Miners who used to extract gold for basic coinage found themselves digging deeper, working longer hours, and developing new techniques just to feed the insatiable appetite of the royal goldsmiths. But here's where things get really wild. The Queen's chain collection wasn't just draining the treasury, it was actually generating massive profits. Foreign nobles would travel for months just to commission Hungarian goldsmiths to create chains in Elizabeth's style. These weren't casual purchases either. We're talking about orders worth more than entire castles, paid for in advance, with waiting lists that stretched for years. The Hungarian goldsmith guilds became so powerful they started dictating terms to the royal court. Master craftsmen who could create chains worthy of the Queen commanded salaries that rivaled those of military commanders. They lived in houses that looked like palaces, owned country estates, and sent their children to the finest schools in Europe. The social hierarchy of medieval Hungary got completely flipped upside down because suddenly the people who could manipulate tiny pieces of metal were more valuable than knights who could swing swords. The training process for these elite goldsmiths was absolutely brutal. Apprentices started as young as 7 years old, spending their entire childhood learning to see flaws invisible to normal human eyes. They practiced making chain links until their fingers bled, then practiced some more until they could forge perfect circles in complete darkness. The dropout rate was insane. Maybe 1 in 50 apprentices ever made it to journeyman level, and only 1 in 100 of those ever became masters capable of working on royal commissions. The master goldsmiths developed techniques so secret they made medieval military strategy look like public knowledge. Families guarded their metalworking formulas like state secrets, passing them down through bloodlines and taking elaborate oaths never to reveal their methods to outsiders. Some workshops employed guards whose only job was preventing industrial espionage from rival goldsmith families. The competition was so intense that sabotage attempts were common, with craftsmen sometimes poisoning their competitors' metal alloys or stealing their specialized tools. Elizabeth understood that her chain collection was essentially a medieval arms race, and she played it brilliantly. Every time a foreign queen appeared wearing impressive jewelry, Elizabeth would commission something even more spectacular. When the French court developed new enameling techniques, Hungarian goldsmiths were ordered to surpass them within months. When Byzantine craftsmen created chains with innovative link designs, Elizabeth's workshops had to reverse engineer and improve upon them immediately. The Queen's competitive drive pushed Hungarian goldsmithing to technological heights that wouldn't be matched for centuries. They developed alloy combinations that made gold stronger without diminishing its color. They created joint mechanisms so sophisticated that chains could move like liquid metal while supporting incredible weight. They pioneered gem-setting techniques that made precious stones appear to float within the chain links themselves. But the real innovation came from the practical challenges of wearing these massive chains during medieval court life. Think about it. Elizabeth had to sit through 6-hour religious ceremonies, dance at elaborate feasts, and conduct diplomatic meetings while wearing jewelry that weighed more than a suit of armor. The goldsmiths had to solve engineering problems that would challenge modern designers. They developed weight distribution systems that spread the load across the Queen's entire torso instead of concentrating it on her neck. They created quick-release mechanisms hidden within decorative elements so chains could be removed rapidly during emergencies. They designed modular systems where individual chain sections could be swapped out to change the overall appearance without requiring entirely new pieces. The chains also had to survive the physical demands of medieval travel. When Elizabeth moved between palaces, her jewelry collection traveled in specially designed wagons with suspension systems that prevented damage from rough roads. The transport containers were masterpieces of medieval engineering, featuring multiple locks, hidden compartments, and even booby traps to deter thieves. The security measures surrounding Elizabeth's chains were absolutely paranoid by any standard. The Queen employed teams of guards whose only responsibility was protecting her jewelry collection. These weren't ordinary soldiers, they were specialists trained to recognize the subtle signs of tampering, to detect poison attempts on metal surfaces, and to fight effectively while protecting fragile, precious objects. The storage systems were equally elaborate. Elizabeth's private chambers included rooms that functioned like medieval bank vaults, with walls lined in iron, floors designed to detect the weight of intruders, and ceiling mechanisms that could drop heavy barriers to trap thieves. The most valuable chains were stored in containers that required multiple keys held by different court officials, ensuring that no single person could access them without authorization. But perhaps the most ingenious security feature was the chains themselves. Many incorporated hidden mechanisms that would permanently damage the jewelry if someone attempted to steal them. Fake clasps that would break if opened incorrectly, links that would shatter if the chain was cut, and even chemical treatments that would discolor the gold if exposed to certain substances commonly used by thieves. The maintenance requirements for Elizabeth's chain collection created another entire industry within the Hungarian court. Specialized cleaners used techniques passed down from Byzantine jewelers to remove tarnish without damaging delicate decorative elements. Repair specialists could rebuild damaged links so perfectly that even the original makers couldn't detect the restoration. Appraisers maintained detailed records of every chain's condition, weight, and estimated value. The Queen's chains required constant attention because medieval environments were incredibly harsh on precious metals. Castle fires filled the air with corrosive smoke. Candlelight ceremonies exposed jewelry to damaging heat. The primitive cleaning methods available to medieval people could easily destroy delicate goldwork if applied incorrectly. Elizabeth's goldsmiths developed maintenance schedules more complex than modern aircraft inspections. Each chain was disassembled completely every few months, with every individual link examined for stress, fractures, wear patterns, or corrosion damage. Worn components were replaced with identical pieces kept in reserve. The reassembly process required such precision that it could take days to complete a single chain. The seasonal rotation of Elizabeth's chain collection was another logistical nightmare that somehow got managed with medieval efficiency. Summer chains were lighter and incorporated ventilation features to prevent overheating during warm weather ceremonies. Winter chains included fur linings and heating elements. Yes, medieval heating elements that used body heat to keep the metal from becoming uncomfortably cold against the skin. Spring chains emphasized fertility symbols and fresh colors to align with the agricultural calendar that dominated medieval life. Autumn chains incorporated harvest motifs and darker tones appropriate for the somber religious observances that marked the end of the growing season. Each seasonal transition required weeks of preparation as court jewelers modified existing pieces and created new elements. The diplomatic protocols surrounding Elizabeth's chains were so complex, they required dedicated court officials to manage them properly. Different chains were appropriate for meetings with representatives from different kingdoms. Wearing the wrong chain to a diplomatic encounter could accidentally insult foreign dignitaries or send unintended political messages that might destabilize international relationships. The Queen's chain choices for specific events were analyzed by foreign intelligence networks with the same intensity that modern governments apply to military intelligence. Diplomatic reports from Elizabeth's court included detailed descriptions of her jewelry selections because these choices provided crucial insights into Hungarian political intentions and alliance priorities. Elizabeth's chains even influenced medieval fashion trends in ways that seem completely insane by modern standards. Wealthy women throughout Europe began wearing chain jewelry, but the imitations were often so heavy and poorly designed that they caused serious injuries. Court physicians from multiple kingdoms reported treating noblewomen for neck damage, shoulder problems, and even spine injuries caused by wearing excessive chain jewelry. The medical community eventually developed specialized treatments for what they called chain sickness, the various health problems caused by wearing heavy jewelry for extended periods. Doctors created exercise regimens to strengthen the muscles needed to support chain jewelry. They developed herbal treatments for the skin irritation caused by metal contact. They even performed primitive chiropractic adjustments to correct the posture problems that resulted from wearing unbalanced jewelry loads. But Elizabeth's chains weren't just influencing fashion and medicine, they were reshaping medieval concepts of feminine power itself. Traditional medieval thinking expected royal women to demonstrate virtue through modesty and restraint. Elizabeth's massive chain displays were the exact opposite of modest or restrained. Yet they somehow enhanced rather than diminished her reputation for virtue and wisdom. The Queen managed this contradiction by incorporating religious elements into even her most ostentatious chains. Tiny reliquary compartments held sacred objects that transformed flashy jewelry into devotional accessories. Hidden inscriptions contained prayers and biblical quotations that made the chains vehicles for displaying piety rather than mere vanity. This fusion of religious devotion and political display created a new model for medieval queenship that other royal women quickly adopted. Chain jewelry became associated with strong female leadership rather than frivolous decoration. The heavier and more elaborate a queen's chains, the more seriously foreign courts took her political opinions and diplomatic initiatives. Elizabeth's influence on medieval gender roles extended beyond just jewelry fashion. Her success at wielding political power, while wearing obviously feminine accessories, helped establish that women could be both beautiful and formidable. The chains became symbols of this new kind of feminine authority that combined traditional medieval virtues with unprecedented political agency. The technological innovations driven by Elizabeth's chain obsession eventually spread far beyond jewelry making. The precision metalworking techniques developed for her chains improved medieval weapons manufacturing, architectural hardware, and even agricultural tools. The quality control methods pioneered by royal goldsmiths were adopted by other medieval industries seeking to improve their product standards. The economic model created by the Hungarian chain industry influenced luxury manufacturing throughout medieval Europe. The combination of royal patronage, international marketing, and technological innovation that made Elizabeth's chains so successful became a template for other luxury goods industries. Textile manufacturers, weapon makers, and even food producers began adopting similar approaches to create premium products for international markets. But the most lasting impact of Elizabeth's chain collection might be how it changed medieval people's understanding of what jewelry could accomplish. Before Elizabeth, precious metals and gems were primarily viewed as stores of value or religious objects. Elizabeth demonstrated that jewelry could be a form of communication, a tool of statecraft, and even a weapon of war when deployed with sufficient skill and imagination. The archaeological discovery at Visegrad represents just the tiniest fraction of what Elizabeth's complete chain collection must have contained. If those small clasps required such incredible craftsmanship, imagine the techniques and artistry that went into the massive ceremonial chains that would have been the centerpieces of her collection. The surviving pieces hint at a level of medieval luxury and sophistication that most people never imagined existed. Modern jewelry historians studying the Visegrad discoveries are finding evidence of metalworking techniques that were supposedly not developed until centuries later. The precision of the openwork decoration suggests tool capabilities that challenge our assumptions about medieval manufacturing limitations. The alloy compositions indicate chemical knowledge that was supposedly lost after the fall of Rome. These discoveries are forcing historians to completely reconsider their understanding of medieval technological capabilities and international trade networks. The materials analysis of Elizabeth's jewelry reveals connections to mining regions across 3 continents, suggesting commercial relationships far more extensive than previously documented. The artistic influences visible in the decorative patterns indicate cultural exchanges that spanned from Ireland to India. The chains that Elizabeth wore weren't just jewelry, they were encyclopedias of medieval knowledge rendered in precious metal. Every link, every decorative element, every technical innovation represented the accumulated wisdom of craftsmen, merchants, diplomats, and scholars from across the known world. Wearing those chains meant carrying the entire medieval universe around your neck. The restoration techniques being developed to study Elizabeth's recovered jewelry are revealing secrets that medieval goldsmiths thought they'd taken to their graves. Modern electron microscopy is showing microscopic tool marks that indicate these craftsmen were using precision instruments we didn't know existed in the 14th century. We're talking about engraving tools so fine they could create details visible only under magnification, suggesting medieval eyesight enhancement techniques that somehow got completely lost to history. But here's what's really blowing researchers' minds. The metal composition analysis shows these chains weren't just made from Hungarian gold. They contain trace elements from mines in England, Bohemia, and even Africa. This means Elizabeth's goldsmiths were operating international supply chains, more complex than most modern jewelry manufacturers manage today. They were somehow coordinating raw material deliveries across thousands of miles of medieval Europe, using nothing but horseback messengers and handwritten contracts. The implications are staggering. Elizabeth's chain collection represents a level of medieval globalization that completely contradicts everything we thought we knew about 14th century commerce. These weren't isolated kingdoms trading with their immediate neighbors. This was a sophisticated international luxury market with quality standards, delivery schedules, and technical specifications that would impress modern business executives. Recent analysis of the soil samples from around the discovered clasps has uncovered something even more remarkable. Traces of exotic spices, silk fibers, and precious wood particles suggest that Elizabeth's jewelry storage areas were perfumed with materials from Asia. The Queen wasn't just wearing chains, she was creating sensory experiences that combined visual magnificence with carefully orchestrated scents designed to overwhelm and impress anyone who came close enough to appreciate the full effect. Think about the psychological warfare involved here. A foreign ambassador walks into Elizabeth's throne room, sees these incredible chains sparkling in the candlelight, steps closer to examine them, and suddenly gets hit with the intoxicating aroma of sandalwood and cinnamon from thousands of miles away. The message was crystal clear. Hungary had commercial relationships and resources that spanned the known world. Opposing this kingdom meant facing enemies you couldn't even imagine. The perfuming techniques alone required knowledge that medieval people supposedly didn't possess. Creating scent combinations that would enhance, rather than overwhelm the metallic smell of gold required understanding of chemistry that wasn't supposed to be rediscovered until the Renaissance. Elizabeth's court perfumers were essentially medieval chemists, whose formulas were so effective that traces of their work are still detectable after 7 centuries buried in dirt. But the real genius of Elizabeth's system becomes apparent when you understand how medieval diplomatic intelligence networks actually functioned. Every court in Europe maintained networks of spies whose job was reporting back on the wealth, military capabilities, and political intentions of foreign kingdoms. These intelligence agents paid special attention to royal jewelry because it provided concrete evidence of a kingdom's financial resources and international connections. Elizabeth turned this espionage system into her own propaganda machine. She knew that detailed descriptions of her chains would be included in intelligence reports sent to every major European capital. Foreign rulers would read these reports and immediately understand that Hungary possessed wealth and technical capabilities that made it a dangerous enemy or valuable ally. The chains became a form of medieval psychological warfare that influenced international relations without requiring actual military action. The strategic deployment of different chains for different diplomatic encounters was choreographed with precision that would impress modern public relations professionals. When Elizabeth wanted to intimidate potential enemies, she wore her heaviest ceremonial chains that demonstrated Hungarian wealth so overwhelming it could fund military campaigns for years. When she wanted to encourage trade negotiations, she wore chains incorporating materials from the kingdoms she hoped to establish commercial relationships with. The Queen's chain rotation schedule was coordinated with international events across medieval Europe. When she learned that a rival queen was planning to wear impressive jewelry to a particular ceremony, Elizabeth would immediately commission new pieces designed to outshine whatever her competition might display. The medieval royal courts were engaged in constant jewelry arms races that influenced everything from military alliances to marriage negotiations. The craftsmen producing Elizabeth's chains developed specialized tools that wouldn't be reinvented until the industrial age. Precision measuring devices that could detect variations smaller than the width of human hair. Heating systems that could maintain exact temperatures for hours during complex metalworking processes. Even primitive versions of assembly line production where different specialists handled specific aspects of chain construction to maximize efficiency and quality control. The waste heat from the goldsmith workshops was captured and redirected through the palace heating systems, making Elizabeth's jewelry production an early example of medieval energy efficiency. The chemical byproducts from gold refining processes were collected and used in other court industries, creating integrated manufacturing systems that maximize the value extracted from every precious metal shipment. Elizabeth's goldsmiths also pioneered quality assurance techniques that established standards still used by modern jewelry manufacturers. Each finished chain underwent inspection processes so thorough they could detect flaws invisible to casual observation. Stress testing procedures ensured the jewelry could withstand the physical demands of court ceremonies. Even primitive forms of batch tracking allowed craftsmen to identify and correct problems before they affected multiple pieces. The apprenticeship programs training goldsmiths for Elizabeth's workshops attracted students from across Europe who were willing to spend decades learning techniques they couldn't acquire anywhere else. These training programs became so prestigious that graduation from Elizabeth's workshops guaranteed employment at any royal court in medieval Europe. The Hungarian goldsmith certification became the medieval equivalent of an Ivy League degree. But the most remarkable aspect of Elizabeth's chain system was how it solved the fundamental problem of medieval royal legitimacy. Medieval kings and queens ruled through a combination of military force, religious authority, and popular consent. Elizabeth's chains enhanced all three sources of power simultaneously. The wealth they represented demonstrated her ability to finance armies. The religious relics they contained proved her divine favor. The artistic magnificence they displayed won popular admiration and respect. The chains allowed Elizabeth to project power in situations where traditional medieval authority structures might have failed her. As a woman ruling in a male-dominated society, as a Polish princess governing Hungarian subjects, as a widow maintaining political influence after her husband's death, Elizabeth faced challenges that military force or religious ceremony alone couldn't overcome. Her chains provided a form of soft power that transcended the limitations of medieval gender and nationality barriers. The international recognition of Elizabeth's chains created diplomatic opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Foreign rulers who might have dismissed a widowed queen as politically irrelevant found themselves requesting audiences just to witness her legendary jewelry collection. These meetings provided Elizabeth with chances to negotiate treaties, arrange marriages, and influence policies across medieval Europe. The economic multiplier effects of Elizabeth's chain obsession transformed entire regions of medieval Hungary. Mining communities that supplied raw materials experienced unprecedented prosperity. Transportation networks developed to move precious metals and finished jewelry across international borders. Banking systems evolved to handle the massive financial transactions involved in commissioning and purchasing luxury chains. The Hungarian currency itself became more stable because Elizabeth's chains created international demand for Hungarian gold that supported exchange rates and encouraged foreign investment. Merchants from across Europe established trading posts in Hungary specifically to access the luxury goods markets that had developed around the royal jewelry industry. The technological innovations pioneered by Elizabeth's goldsmiths eventually spread to other industries through the natural movement of craftsmen seeking new opportunities. Weapon manufacturers adopted precision metalworking techniques that improved sword and armor quality. Architectural projects incorporated decorative metalwork inspired by chain jewelry designs. Even agricultural tools benefited from the improved metallurgy techniques developed for luxury applications. The social mobility created by the Hungarian goldsmith industry challenged traditional medieval class structures in ways that wouldn't be repeated until the Industrial Revolution. Master craftsmen who started as peasant apprentices could achieve wealth and status that rivaled the nobility. Their success demonstrated that technical skill and artistic talent could overcome birth circumstances in ways that medieval society normally didn't permit. Elizabeth's chains also influenced medieval educational priorities by creating demand for mathematical, artistic, and technical knowledge that hadn't previously been valued in court settings. The Queen's goldsmiths needed to understand geometry for designing chain proportions, chemistry for creating alloy combinations, and even basic engineering for solving weight distribution problems. This practical application of academic knowledge helped bridge the gap between scholarly learning and commercial application. The international reputation of Hungarian chain jewelry created cultural soft power that enhanced the kingdom's diplomatic influence throughout medieval Europe. Other royal courts began adopting Hungarian fashion trends, architectural styles, and even governmental practices because they associated Hungarian culture with sophistication and success. Elizabeth's chains became ambassadors for Hungarian civilization that promoted the kingdom's interests more effectively than traditional diplomatic missions. The preservation techniques developed for maintaining Elizabeth's chains influenced medieval approaches to protecting other valuable objects, including manuscripts, artwork, and even architectural elements. The climate control methods pioneered for jewelry storage were adapted for libraries and treasure rooms. The cleaning formulas developed for precious metals found applications in maintaining religious artifacts and ceremonial objects. Modern conservation scientists studying the Visegrad discoveries are finding evidence of preservation techniques so advanced they're being adapted for contemporary museum applications. Medieval Hungarian conservators apparently understood principles of environmental chemistry that weren't supposed to be rediscovered until the 20th century. Their methods for preventing metal corrosion and controlling humidity remain effective after 7 centuries of neglect. The recent archaeological work at Visegrad is revealing that Elizabeth's jewelry collection was just one component of a much larger medieval luxury ecosystem that included textiles, ceramics, woodwork, and even landscaping designed to complement and enhance the visual impact of her chains. The entire palace complex was essentially a 3-dimensional jewelry box designed to showcase the Queen's collection in the most impressive possible settings. The garden layouts discovered at Visegrad show pathways and gathering areas positioned to maximize the natural lighting effects on metallic jewelry during different times of day and seasons of the year. Even the architectural elements were designed with reflective surfaces that would amplify and redirect light to create spectacular displays when Elizabeth appeared wearing her chains in different areas of the palace grounds. The integration of jewelry display considerations into medieval architecture represents a level of design sophistication that challenges our understanding of medieval aesthetic theory and engineering capabilities. Elizabeth's court architects were essentially creating the world's first purpose-built luxury retail environments, centuries before anyone conceived of modern shopping centers or museum display systems. These discoveries are forcing historians to reconsider not just Elizabeth's individual story, but our entire understanding of medieval civilization's technological capabilities, international connections, and cultural sophistication. The chains weren't just jewelry, they were the visible manifestation of a medieval world far more complex, connected, and advanced than anyone imagined possible. The story of Elizabeth's chains is still being written as archaeologists continue uncovering new evidence at Visegrad, and researchers develop better techniques for analyzing medieval artifacts. Each new discovery reveals another layer of complexity in this remarkable fusion of artistry, technology, politics, and personal ambition that defined one of medieval Europe's most influential queens. The chains that once announced Elizabeth's power across 14th century Europe are now announcing to the modern world that medieval civilization achieved heights of sophistication we're only beginning to understand. So here we are, 7 centuries later, still discovering the secrets that Queen Elizabeth's chains have been hiding in the Hungarian soil. Those tiny clasps found at Visegrad, they're not just pretty medieval trinkets gathering dust in a museum case. They're proof that our ancestors were way more sophisticated, way more connected, and way more brilliant than we ever gave them credit for. Think about it. While we're impressed by our global supply chains and international trade networks, Elizabeth was orchestrating luxury manufacturing operations that spanned 3 continents, using nothing but horseback messengers and handwritten contracts. While we marvel at modern marketing and brand recognition, she was turning jewelry into political weapons that influenced the balance of power across medieval Europe. The real kicker? We're still trying to figure out how her goldsmiths achieved technical precision that challenges our assumptions about medieval capabilities. 700 years later, with all our modern technology and scientific knowledge, we're looking at these artifacts and scratching our heads, wondering how they pulled off techniques that were supposedly impossible in the 14th century. Elizabeth's chains weren't just about showing off wealth or looking fabulous at medieval dinner parties. They were about survival, power, and proving that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is take something everyone thinks they understand and use it in ways nobody saw coming. She turned jewelry into diplomacy, fashion into warfare, and precious metal into political influence that lasted long after she was gone. The next time someone tells you the past was simple or primitive, remember Queen Elizabeth of Poland and her legendary chains. Remember that buried beneath our feet might be evidence of civilizations far more remarkable than we ever imagined. Because sometimes the heaviest chains really are the ones that set you free.